Let's take a deep dive into Scrum framework. When it comes to Agile, Scrum is probably the best way to do new product development, and it certainly is the most popular one. In this movie we will take a look at the concept behind it, how it works, and why it works. And we will look at what it means for product management, development teams and organizations as a whole. Let's start with the 3 pillars of Scrum: transparency, adaptation and inspection. Adaptation means we like change. Or to put it better, we like solving problems, and we optimize for agility, for adapting to new insights. So Scrum is about responding to the situation at hand, and we prefer adapting to the market to doing something very efficiently when nobody is waiting for. Transparency translates best to being honest. Scrum is not a silver bullet, but it is a silver mirror. It is extremely good at exposing problems, but it doesn't solve them for you. People tend to solve problems. Scrum can be painful at times, but think of it like going to a dentist or going to the gym, but then with more fun. Inspection means we check everything. We're fond of adapting, but we don't adapt just for the sake of it. We actively seek new insights and new information that allows us to make better decisions than we could before. Without inspection, you're not really doing Scrum. So, what products should we develop with Scrum? Well, if you think of product development as a problem versus solution matrix, then you can depict how much you know about a problem, which is typically a product management area, and you can, on the other axis, plot how much you know about the solution space, which is typically an engineering area. Those of you familiar with the Stacy diagram may recognize where I'm going with this. If things are rather straightforward, the product development process is also straightforward. Think of this like making a steering wheel. It has some complexity to it, but the wheel itself is just a round thing and it gets mounted on a steering shaft, so it's not overly complicated. This type of product development we will call simple. The steering system itself is more complicated, especially if we talk about things like power steering or drive-by-wire. Then again, it's not like it's impossible. It's been invented before and we can probably copy previous designs, if that's legally permitted. And those designs will most likely work. So it's not simple, but it's more like complicated. Now, driving itself, or autonomous driving, that involves so many factors that it's not doable by just making a plan or copying a design. We will really need to adapt what is happening in the market. So if your product looks like that kind of problem, then we will call it complex, meaning it's almost impossible to do it without feedback. Now, I once had the pleasure of driving through a crowded city in West Africa. That requires nerves of steel, and it feels like nothing is predictable. And actually, chaotic would be a very good word to describe it. That kind of product development is labeled chaos, or you can call it a startup. Scrum is really good for complex product development, when more is unknown than known. Sinefin, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, describes this method as probe, sense, and then respond. So Scrum is for optimal teams, but how do we get these kick-ass, high-performing development teams? Well, it is important to know that whenever you put a group of people together, they go through 4 distinct phases of team building: forming, storming, norming, and performing. And whenever we break up the team or we change the composition, we effectively reset the state, and it can take quite a bit of time before they are back up to speed. So a great addition to the Agile Manifesto would have been stable teams over sourcing. Keeping the band together already solves many headaches. And really, Tuckman figured this out in 1965. You can find out what phase your team is in by observing their behavior. In the forming phase, we tend to avoid conflict. Behavior is formal and they sort of observe more or less what is happening. It's not really a team, it's a collection of individuals. At some point, they will start fighting or at least disagreeing. This is a good thing. It means they care enough to make a point and to seek out a solution. But of course, they should not just keep bickering. The results typically are standards, common goals. For some this may mean disagree but commit, and others may get convinced and fully accept the outcome. Either way, we're now on our way to becoming a committed team, and we are committed to the product we are developing. This triggers a phase of autonomy and cooperativeness. Some teams I work with compared it to smooth sailing, and I kind of like the analogy. A different way to look at this is by applying a conflict model, when comparing assertiveness to cooperativeness. Low assertiveness, but also a low cooperativeness, means that the team is just accommodating each other. Basically, we're still individuals, and when characters are stronger, competition will emerge. At first, this may seem like a good way to get progress, but remember that 1 and 1 should become 3 if we are a team, and 1 and 0 is still 1 if we fight for our own solutions. However, without this assertiveness, we just compromise what we think, and in Scrum teams, we all contribute to the product. So we see assertiveness towards guided cooperation. We see collaboration. At the heart of Scrum, we find respect for each other. We find openness, so we listen and accept other ideas, and we share, of course, our own knowledge. We find commitment to the way of working, to the product, to the goal. We like to work at a sustainable pace, but it doesn't hurt to be excited for what we're doing. A word of warning: Scrum tends to expose policies and way of working that are illogical, but are, as people put it, just how we do things around here. It requires a special kind of courage to practice Scrum and challenge and change the status quo. This creates a strong focus on building the right thing in the right way. One word: trust, would be at the heart of it. Or as Steve Jobs once said, it makes no sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do. So this development team builds the product in small iterative steps. And we like to limit the size of the team from 3 to 9. If it's bigger, it gets hard to be a team and know what everybody's doing, and information just gets lost and piles up. That's a waste. If the teams get smaller, well, it's not really a team anymore, is it? The product they are building gets built in small steps, increments. But it's important to emphasize that these are done increments. And done means that they deliver some form of value. Sometimes it's risk reduction, sometimes cool new features, sometimes it fixes problems, and sometimes it just prevents them. Not all changes may be visible, but we create increments in such a way that we can get relevant feedback. So it's not something that is in an in-between state. Going back to my driving example, so it's not about just learning how to use a clutch. A clutch in itself is useless. A number of things must all be present before we can drive on even the simplest roads. The second role we find in Scrum is that of a Scrum Master. The Scrum Master protects the teams and acts as a guide by teaching the team about Scrum. Scrum Masters also remove impediments, allowing the team to develop full speed ahead. And finally, the Scrum Master's goal is to spread Scrum throughout the organization by teaching the team to self-organize. Scrum Master's general line of thought is, as Lawrence Bonema elegantly once said, given time, the team will of course figure this out themselves. However, I could nudge them towards. Ultimately, the Scrum Master's job is like parenting. It's fun, it's tremendous responsibility, and it's only successful if we create autonomy and self-organization. And what about product owner? Well, the primary responsibility of the product owner is to make sure that we don't build the wrong thing. I believe it was Ken Schwaber who once said, if your product is driving off a cliff, Scrum will help you to do that twice as fast and with twice the impact. The product owner is setting the course, and that is quite a responsibility. Fortunately, Scrum provides the product owner with an awesome feedback mechanism, the done increment. I will emphasize done yet again because I see a lot of teams not exposing their increment to real users and get a real feedback. Without real feedback in the form of data, observations, interactions, discussions, etc. with stakeholders and actual people that actually use the product, well, we're back to guesswork. And if you're really good in predicting the future, it would be my advice to spend more time in casinos. The development team produces this done increment in regular predictable intervals, which we call sprints. Not more than 4 weeks, typically 2 weeks and sometimes just 1 week. Think of this as a subway. Missing a subway is not really a big problem if you know that the next one arrives in a short time. And all these small steps will get you a long way while staying very agile along the way. Compare this to taking a plane once a year. You really want to show up on time, and missing it has serious consequences. So as a result, you tend to plan a lot and try to anticipate every possible roadblock along the way. Agile teams also plan a lot, but they focus at very tangible roadblocks, something that is directly impacting the sprint. And for example, every day the team gathers to make a daily plan in less than 15 minutes. Now that is efficient. So we are constantly making adjustments to meet our sprint goal. And that is the ultimate objective that we want to achieve this sprint. It's a thing of value, a feature that brings in money, or an improvement that lowers our cost of ownership. It might be an experiment to validate if we are steering the product in the right direction. Sprint goals are nice, since they act as a lens for the development team, giving them greater autonomy over what needs to be done in the sprint. The sprint backlog holds the product backlog items that the Scrum team selected from the product backlog for this particular sprint. A very important thing to remember is that the product backlog is an ordered list. It's not just a list of requirements with priorities. We want to avoid Moscow-like requirements, where there are lots of prio ones or just must-have items, risk reduction, anything that makes sense to the product owner. But remember that a backlog is an emerging artifact. We probably won't get it right the first time, so keep organizing it and keep cleaning it out. That's something that's really natural to product owners. stakeholders. Some stakeholders may be new to this, and we must explain to them that we won't say yes to everything. Saying yes to everything would actually be a silent no. Figuring out what is really important and what should be the next great thing to build is a collaborative effort. So how do we know how much we can build this sprint? For this we look at how much the team could handle in the past, and we use that as a basis for our planning. You could say we look at the team's velocity, the sum of all their output. And from this it's really obvious that we should keep the team consistent, since changing the team frequently makes it impossible to say anything about their velocity. If your sprint planning sessions take forever and the team is constantly puzzled by what the product owner asks, you're probably not spending enough time refining your backlog. Product backlog refinement can take up to 10% of the total sprint capacity, and that may sound like a lot of time. But think of Abraham Lincoln's famous quote, "Give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I will spend the first 4 sharpening the axe." Compared to that, 10% sounds quite okay. A word to the wise, if you spend all your time building features and no time on restructuring your product, you will build up debt. Think of little bugs that are just nuisances, or architectural decisions that seemed fine at the time but are now slowing down the team in the current situation. Debt is a very accurate term, since interest needs to be paid every iteration, and at some point compound interest starts to outweigh the benefit. So try to find a balance. If the team gets slower and slower sprint by sprint, it is usually a strong indicator that it's time to repay some of that debt. The team is extremely transparent about their progress and employ some form of visualization to show how likely it is that they're going to hit the mark when it comes to the sprint goal. Most teams use burn down charts, but there are many other formats, as long as you have something that visualizes the progress. After all, if you find out that you're not able to deliver on expectations that were set during sprint planning, we really like to know. Not so much in order to increase the pressure on the team, but rather to manage the expectations. And stakeholders tend to like honesty and upfront notice. Actually, most humans hate negative surprises. The difference between Scrum and traditional product development is that we want real feedback from real users, not just steering committees or internal parties. Well, unless they are, of course, your actual users. In the sprint review, stakeholders, users and the Scrum team look at the product increment, the product backlog, but also at market trends. If your sprint reviews feel lonely, it is because stakeholders have not yet grasped the benefits of Scrum. Scrum is not a fire and forget method, but a series of constant refinements. Polishing, adapting, emerging. It's like polishing stones. And polishing stones is really hard if you don't have anything to grind with. Likewise, you're not likely to get good results if your sprint review is just a tech demo. Think of the sprint review as a strategy session, where we are all present to gather input on the best way forward. Ultimately, the product owner decides, but the best strategy is conducted from the collaborative exchange of knowledge. So what is the next big thing for your product? Sprint reviews can take up to 4 hours for a 4-week sprint. That may seem very long, but think about the investment. A team from 3 to 9 people working for 2 to 4 weeks is quite an investment. So why would you rush setting the direction we're going in? Unless you are exceptionally good in predicting the future, you typically see some form of update in the product backlog. We've learned something, gained some new insight or a feature, or perhaps a deeper insight in what is a more valuable ordering of the existing backlog items. If sprint reviews do not reveal new insights, you're probably doing status updates. Now, it's rare, but sometimes we do goof up. We started working on something and it became obsolete. Continuing with the current sprint goal will not bring value, but rather destroy it. In Scrum, you can terminate the sprint abnormally, but only in very rare circumstances. And it should cause the development team, the product owner and stakeholders deep grief. In an early Scrum Master training, we got the advice that if this happens, the team should find a public space in the organization, lie down on the floor and cry out loud to express their grief over the wasted energy. Well, that might be overdoing it, but think of it as an emergency brake on a subway. If you really need it, it is there. If you pull it all the time, there is no more predictability. Scrum is thoroughly rooted in lean principles, and in its core, this is about the concept of Kaizen. Or in English, change is good. There is no end state in which we stop improving. We improve how we work, what we do, and how we work together. All these things are in flux and can always be tweaked for further improvement. The sprint retrospective can take up to 3 hours to examine and improve our process. Did you know that the Toyota employees came up with more than 1 million process improvements last year? And what is even more astonishing is that 90% of them actually got implemented. So take your time. There is always something that you have learned and that you can improve next iteration. There are tons of ways to run a retrospective. Personally, I like the team to look at what they should do more or less of. What processes we should keep just the way they are, or what we should start or stop doing. Generally, this works great. However, if the team predominantly talks about what others should change, you can borrow a page from Stephen Covey and create some space where they can think about their circle of influence by asking what others should do differently. But then ask what we as a team should change and how our way of working is. Ultimately, one should look at a personal level and think, what can I do differently next sprint? Congratulations! You now know how Scrum works, but how agile is your organization as a whole? If Scrum is about running the subway, but nobody is selling tickets, we still have a problem. What are agile traits that you can observe? Agile organizations are purpose-driven, not profit-driven. It's not that we don't like profit, but it tends to follow from a higher goal. This mission is what gets the people out of bed in the morning. In agile organizations, people know why their organizations exist and how they can contribute to it. In 1965, during an interview, a reporter asked the restroom attendant at NASA what her job was. She supposedly replied, "Well, I help putting men on the moon, of course." Knowing what your purpose is and how you contribute is one of the key drivers. The second trait is the ability to learn. We started off with Stacy and the fact that new product development means that more is unknown than known. This implies that we need to learn faster than our competitors and faster than the pace in which the market develops. It's not surprising that Scrum can lay that foundation with inspect and adapt at its very core. The third trait is how people work together. Solomon said, knowledge is generally socially constructed through collaborative efforts towards a shared purpose or by dialogues and challenges due to differences in people's perspectives. Transparency is the seed condition to make this happen. Plants do not grow when hidden from sunlight, and neither do great ideas. Speaking of plants, for most organizations this is a huge change. A change in the way we manage people, a change in the way we manage products. A gardener doesn't tell his flowers to grow, but rather he creates the proper conditions for it. And that requires a great courage. Letting go of traditional control mechanisms to foster autonomy is like kids learning to ride a bike. It's a necessity, but it also requires some nerves of steel. Agile leaders make sure craftsmanship is emphasized, and by doing so they look after the things that motivate and engage people. Then there is the business aspect. A healthy organization strikes a balance between today's products that drive cash flow and pay for the teams. But they also invest some of that in tomorrow's products. Technology and customer needs move at an incredible pace, and what we know about tomorrow might be history faster than we expect. So we need a couple of bets out there. High-level assumptions that we work on and develop. We would rather disrupt ourselves than be disrupted by a competitor. Which means we actively look at our market and we seek to find valuable new propositions. So, no internal politics, please. Alright, but how can we measure that we are on the right track? Let's look at some actionable metrics using evidence-based management. Metrics like revenue, margin, customer, employee happiness, net promoter score, rate of growth, all these are great indicators of our current health. If revenue is at an all-time high but our staff is completely overworked, we're not really sustainable. If customers are happy with our product but the margin is eroding, things look grim as well. So it is about striking the proper balance. We can also look at how often can we release products to the market and how long does it take for a great idea to hit the shelves and be converted into revenue. This metric tells you something about how responsive your product development is. But are we getting better or are we getting worse? Are we spreading out our development effort over many old versions of the product? Are we maintaining old stuff that is hardly used? What is our depth versus functionality ratio? And are we multitasking teams over many products where most of their energy is lost in context switching? In other words, how focused are we? If you think of your product development as a tree, then ask yourself the following 4 questions. How fertile is our agile soil? How tasty do our customers think our fruits are? And what is the fruit to leaf ratio? And just how much blossom is there for future fruit? Don't make it overcomplicated. Just start doing Scrum and improve. I hope this was useful for you and inspired you to create better products. Chris Lucassen, Product Somehow.